In the majestic Jerusalem of King Solomon's time, where divine wisdom was manifested through God's chosen monarch, there lived a young man named Ephraim. Known throughout the city for his sharp tongue and explosive temper, Ephraim often got into heated arguments that damaged not only his reputation but also his relationships and business. One particularly difficult morning, after yet another dispute had cost him an important business deal, Ephraim finally recognized that his impulsiveness was destroying his future. With a heavy heart and restless mind, he decided to seek guidance from King Solomon, whose fame for wisdom had spread far beyond the borders of Israel. Upon arriving at the royal palace, Ephraim found the king in his private garden, where the monarch would meditate on the mysteries of God and receive those who sought his guidance. Solomon, noticing the anguish on the young man's face, welcomed him with a compassionate smile and said, "My son, I see that your heart is troubled. Allow me to share with you a story that the Lord has given me in wisdom." Near Ein Gedi, where palm trees overhang the crystal-clear waters and ibex leap among the steep rocks, there lived a man named Gamaliel. Solomon began, his eyes shining with the divine wisdom that characterized him. Gamaliel did not possess extraordinary material wealth, but he did possess a much more valuable treasure: the ability to truly listen. The elder was known throughout the region not only for his wisdom in resolving conflicts, but mainly for the way he handled each situation. When someone came to him, Gamaliel first listened, not only to the words spoken, but also to those who remained silent. He observed not only the gestures, but also the hesitation between them. It was as if he could see through the layers of emotion until he reached the heart of each issue. In the same village lived a young man named Reuben, the son of merchants, whose temperament was very similar to his own, Ephraim. Reuben was known for his sharp intelligence, but also for his inability to contain the words that flowed from his lips like water from a plentiful spring. His sharp tongue had already created enemies with important merchants and caused grief to his parents. Intrigued by the influence that Gamaliel exerted over everyone, Reuben began to observe him from afar. How could someone gain so much respect by saying so little? How could his few words carry more weight than all the elaborate arguments he himself used to construct? One day, Solomon continued, settling back in his seat as Ephraim listened attentively, Reuben decided that he would discover the secret of the power that lay in Gamaliel's words and silence. But what he found was far beyond what he had expected. The king paused, noting how his words had captured Ephraim's attention, whose eyes now reflected a mixture of curiosity and recognition. Reuben's story was, in many ways, a mirror of his own journey. One warm summer morning, Solomon continued, Reuben decided to visit Gamaliel. He found the old man sitting under an old olive tree, apparently absorbed in contemplation of the valley that stretched out below. To Reuben's surprise, Gamaliel did not immediately turn to welcome him, but simply indicated with a gentle gesture that he should sit beside him. For long minutes, which to Reuben seemed like an eternity, they both remained silent. The young man, accustomed to filling every moment with words, felt increasingly uncomfortable. His thoughts raced like wild horses, formulating and reformulating what he would say when the moment arrived. Finally, when the sun had traveled a good way across the sky, Gamaliel turned to him and asked in a calm voice, "What have you learned in this silence, my son?" Reuben, taken aback by the unexpected question, opened his mouth to answer, but for the first time in his life, he found himself speechless. During the forced silence, he had listened to the birdsong, felt the rustle of leaves in the breeze, watched a small family of partridges crossing the valley, and noticed how his own heart had gradually calmed. "I see you are beginning to understand," Gamaliel smiled. "But there is an even greater lesson I must share with you. Tomorrow, in the marketplace, you will have the opportunity to witness it." The sun was already beginning to set when Reuben left Gamaliel's house, his mind filled with unanswered questions. Little did he know that the next day would bring one of the greatest challenges to the old man's wisdom, and one of the most important lessons of his life. "And so," Solomon said, noticing how Ephraim leaned forward slightly, completely absorbed in the story, that the true test of the power of silence began. The next morning, Solomon continued, his eyes reflecting the wisdom of years. The marketplace of Ein Gedi was bustling with its usual activity when Adonijah, a merchant known for his cunning and arrogance, arrived with a retinue of camels laden with merchandise. Adonijah had long envied Gamaliel's influence over the people and had carefully planned this moment. In a loud and arrogant voice, Adonijah began to publicly question Gamaliel's wisdom. He hurled tricky questions about the law and the prophets, taunts about past judgments, and malicious insinuations about the old man's humble life. The crowd, drawn by the commotion, began to gather around them. Reuben watched closely, his heart racing. Under other circumstances, he himself would have leapt to Gamaliel's defense with a torrent of indignant words. But something in the old man's serene countenance kept him silent. Gamaliel stood still, his eyes fixed on Adonijah, attentive and calm. He showed no signs of irritation or haste to respond. The longer the elder remained silent, the more agitated Adonijah became. His questions began to become contradictory, his accusations lost consistency, and his face grew redder and redder. "What happened then," Solomon said, pausing meaningfully as Ephraim stared at him intently, "was something that no one in the square would ever forget." Gamaliel's silence was about to teach its most powerful lesson. When the sun had reached its highest point, Solomon continued, and Adonijah had exhausted his repertoire of accusations, Gamaliel finally stood up. The silence that followed was so deep that one could hear the rustling of olive leaves in the wind. In a voice as calm and clear as the waters of Ein Gedi, Gamaliel began to speak. For each accusation hurled, he offered a response grounded in Scripture. For each tricky question, he offered an explanation that illuminated not only the specific issue but revealed deeper truths. His words, few and precise, were like drops of dew on thirsty ground. The crowd listened in absolute silence, amazed. Even the most skeptical merchants leaned forward, trying not to miss a single word. Reuben, watching, began to understand the true power of Gamaliel's silence. It was not just the absence of words, but the time for consideration that allowed wisdom to blossom. Adonijah, seeing his strategy crumble, tried to interrupt, but his words sounded empty in the face of the elder's calm wisdom. Little by little, the merchant backed away, until, humiliated by his own imprudence, he left the square in silence. But the real transformation, Solomon said, his eyes meeting Ephraim's, was just beginning. What happened next would change Reuben's life forever, just as it could change yours. After that memorable day in the square, Solomon continued, Reuben began to visit Gamaliel regularly. Each visit began with a period of contemplative silence beneath the ancient olive tree, a ritual that initially challenged the young man's restless nature but gradually became a balm for his soul. During these meetings, Gamaliel shared with Reuben the principles he had learned over decades of seeking divine wisdom. Silence, the elder explained, is not merely the absence of words, but the presence of God. When we silence our external voice, we can better hear the voice of the eternal in our hearts. As the months passed, Reuben's transformation became evident to all. His words, once impetuous and abundant, became measured and precious like rare gems. His counsel, now preceded by moments of quiet reflection, began to be sought after by people throughout the region. But the greatest proof of Reuben's transformation would come in a situation no one could have foreseen. A bitter dispute between two prominent families threatened to divide the community. Everyone expected Gamaliel to intervene, but the elder, with a serene smile, indicated that Reuben should mediate the conflict. The moment had come, Solomon said, watching as Ephraim held his breath in anticipation, for the disciple to demonstrate whether he had truly learned his master's most profound lesson. And so, Solomon concluded, Reuben faced his greatest challenge. Faced with the feuding families, he began not with words but with silence. A silence that, as he had learned from Gamaliel, was filled with the presence of the eternal. During the mediation, Reuben demonstrated the wisdom that the Lord gives to those who learn to wait on him. Following the example of his master, he first listened, truly listened, to each side of the dispute. And when he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of truth and the lightness of grace, reflecting the very wisdom of God. That day, not only was the conflict resolved, but a new wise man emerged in Israel. Reuben had become a vessel of the Lord, through whom divine wisdom could flow to bless his people. "See, my son Ephraim," Solomon said, leaning forward, "just as it is written in our Proverbs, even a fool, when he keeps silent, is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is considered prudent. This is not just a matter of human wisdom, but of submission to divine wisdom." When we learn to silence our own voice, we make room for God's voice to be heard. Ephraim, deeply moved by the story, realized that he was at a crossroads in his life. Like Reuben, he too had a choice to make: continue to trust in his own eloquence or learn the sacred art of silence. Remember, Solomon concluded with a fatherly smile, that true power lies not in the quantity of our words, but in the quality of our silence before the Lord. For it is in silence that we find not only wisdom, but the very presence of God. And so, on that afternoon in Jerusalem, another seed of divine wisdom was planted, promising to bear fruit that would benefit not only Ephraim, but all who crossed his path in the years to come. Please tell us in the comments which part of this story that teaches us important lessons touched you the most. Subscribe to the channel now, turn on the notification bell, and also remember to hit the like button and share this video with someone you know who needs to hear this story today. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow for our next video.